Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Hi. Hello. Welcome. Good evening and welcome. My name is Linda Nemec Foster, and my husband Tony and I are founders of the Contemporary Writer Series here at Aquinas. This year we are celebrating our 17th season, and this evening we are celebrating our second event for the season with poet Thomas Lux. Before I introduce Tom, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping things, and my husband is going for a cell phone right now, which is a smart thing. First of all, please turn off all cell phones, pagers, anything that can go buzz or beep or make a sound like Beethoven's symphony, please turn them off. And also note that our next authors this season will be essayist and poet Deborah Marquardt on February 17th, and novelist and multi-genre author Luis Alberto Urrea on April 15th. And if you're interested, we have brochures and magnets describing our series in the front lobby. And if you're interested in being on our mailing list, please see Pam Lupke, right there, that lovely woman in the back after the reading, and she'll get your information. Thank you. Also, after Tom's reading, we will have a 10-15-minute Q&A session, so you could ask him your questions, and there will also be books available for you to buy and Tom to sign afterwards. All right, over dinner last night, I had dinner with Tom with my husband. I realized that way back in 1979, Tom Lux and I had a ships passing in the night moment. Earlier that year, in 1979, I had graduated from Goddard College in Vermont with my MFA in creative writing. Now, that program has since transplanted to Warren Wilson College in North Carolina. Now, later that same year, in 1979, Thomas Lux started teaching there and continues to be affiliated with the program. 2 years ago, that program hosted its 35th anniversary with a gala weekend at Warren Wilson. For me, one of the highlights was a terrific conversation between two faculty members, Tom Lux and Stephen Dobbins, and they talked about the art and craft of poetry, the process, the subject matter, the journey from idea to draft to poem. It was a fascinating discussion between two extraordinary poets who happened to be very good friends. And it gave me an insight into why Lux's poetry matters. His language, deceptively simple yet layered in powerful images, is honest, genuine, and deeply rooted in the broad landscape of the human condition, our shared experiences of joy, loss, and longing. Whether he's writing about Emily Dickinson's mother, farmers who live near rivers, the school cafeteria lunch ladies, or a love-struck graffiti artist, Lux brings an immediacy, a poignancy to his work. His haunting and ironic poems reflect both tragedy and humor in a seamless balancing act. To quote Billy Collins, and this is big coming from Billy Collins, Lux is one of the few poets writing today who fills me with envy. Thomas Lux is the author of 12 collections of poetry, including Memory's Hand Grenade, Split Horizon, which won the prestigious Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, The Street of Clocks, God Particles, and Child Made of Sand. He has been honored with 3 NEA grants and a Guggenheim Fellowship. He currently teaches at Georgia Institute of Technology, where he serves as the Bourne Chair in Poetry. Lux is also active in directing a community program in Atlanta that conducts poetry workshops in prisons and in centers for HIV-positive patients. Please join me in welcoming Thomas Lux.
Thank you, Linda. That was very, very generous and thoughtful. Thank you. It's really nice to be here, and I'm amazed at how many people are here on a big baseball night. Chances are you'll be, by the third inning or so, you'll be able to watch the game. I have to admit, before I start, that I am a Red Sox fan. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was ready to concede. I was in Detroit before I came here, and by the third inning of the second game, when you guys had struck out 24 of 36 Red Sox players, I was preparing my concession speech in Detroit and ready to repeat it here, but it's not over yet. But it's a great series. I always really liked the Tigers, but your home team's your home team. The Red Sox are my home team. But again, I'm really glad to be here. This is a famous reading series among writers in America, and I, of course, was very well aware of it, and I'm honored to be here. So thank you. I'm going to read for about 35 minutes, maybe, and then 10 minutes or so of questions, if you like, if you have some questions. I'm going to read first from this book, Selected Poems, that came out in 1997. So I've already been several books beyond this, and I'll read some of those poems too. But I'll start with a poem. Everybody can hear me, right? In the back, okay? Called Refrigerator 1957. I'm thinking of those giant old refrigerators that used to exist in the 1950s, and I'm thinking of the one in my own childhood home, and it centers around one thing that was in this refrigerator. Refrigerator 1957. More like a vault. You pull the handle out, and on the shelves, not a lot. And what there is, a boiled potato in a bag, a chicken carcass under foil, looking dispirited, drained, mugged. This is not a place to go in hunger or hope. But just to the right of the middle door shelf, a lit from within red, heart red, sexual red, wet neon red, shining red in their liquid, exotic, aloof, slumming in such company, a jar of maraschino cherries. 3/4 full, fiery globes like strippers at a church social. Maraschino cherries, maraschino, the only foreign word I knew. Not once did I see these cherries employed, not in a drink nor on top of a glob of ice cream or just pop one in your mouth, not once. The same jar there through an entire childhood of dull dinners. Bald meat, pocked peas, and, see above, boiled potatoes. Maybe they came over from the old country, family heirlooms, or were status symbols bought with a piece of the first paycheck from a sweatshop, which beat the pig farm in Bohemia, handed down from my grandparents to my parents to be someday mine, then my child's. They were beautiful. And if I never ate one, it was because I knew they might be missed, or because I knew it would not be replaced, and because you do not eat that which rips your heart with joy. They were very colorful things, maraschino cherries. I asked my mother years later what they were there for, and she said she would put a half of one on my grandmother's grapefruit, which she had about once a month, so that's why they lasted so long. I tell people, you don't get a lot of money from poetry. I don't recommend it as a career path if you want to make a lot of money. But I got about 10 jars of maraschino cherries after that poem was published, and One of them must have been from a restaurant or something, because it was about this big, 1,000 or more maraschino cherries. But I was just moving at the time, so I couldn't. How do you carry a giant jar of maraschino cherries from New York to Atlanta? So I left them in the refrigerator of the apartment I was renting. I always hoped that whoever opened that up and saw them was struck by the color the same way I was. I have a daughter who's 26 now, and I wrote this poem before she was born. Now, those of you, the young people in the audience, your baby books, your baby picture books that your parents all have, the first picture is not, it's an ultrasound picture or something like that. It's not your first baby picture. Now we have pictures that can be taken of our children even before they're born. And this one is called Upon Seeing an Ultrasound Photo of an Unborn Child. And I'm addressing my own unborn child at the time in this poem. Tadpole, it's not time yet to nag you about college, though I have some thoughts on that. Baseball, ditto, or abstract principles. Enjoy your delicious, soupy womb warmth. Do some rolls and salts. It'll be too crowded soon. Delight in your early dreams, which no one will attempt to analyze. For now, may your toes blossom, your fingers lengthen, your sexual organs grow, too soon to tell which yet, sensitive, your teeth form their buds in their forming jawbone, your already booming heart expand literally, now metaphorically, later. Oh, your spine, eyebrows, nape, knees, fibulae, lungs, lips. But your soul, dear child, I don't see it here. When does that come in? Whence? Perhaps God and your mother and even I will all contribute, and you'll learn yourself to coax it from wherever. Your soul, which holds your bones together and lets you live on earth. Fingerling, sidecar, nubbin, I'm waiting, it's me, Dad, I'm out here. You already know where Mom is. I'll see you more directly upon arrival. You'll be recognizing me, the tall-seeming, delighted blonde guy, and I'll have your nose. Luckily, she didn't get my nose. I'm playing off that thing every parent did at one time or another, got your nose and you do this with your finger. Here's another poem about her having to do with my daughter. When she was little, sometimes she had to come to readings of mine, and she never wanted to listen. Of course, parents don't care what kids don't care what their parents do. But she always wanted to be introduced to the audience. If I read a poem about her, she'd stand up, turn around, take a bow, and then go back to coloring while I read. But this is called Little Tooth. And the coolest thing, the reason I want to read this poem is it was on they have a thing in New York and other cities called Poetry in Motion, where they put poems on buses and subways. If you've ever been on a New York subway, they have all these ads up along inside the subway. Dr. Z is a skin doctor, and they have doctor, dentists, and all sorts of stuff. But they put poems there, too. And the people who do this, the Poetry Society of America, and must have something to do with the train people in New York, they didn't tell me, they didn't inform me that this poem was going to be there. I used to see it on the subway in New York and think, boy, that'd be really cool to have a poem on the subway. Then I realized everybody on there was dead, so I wasn't that excited. But I'm in Atlanta one day, 3 or 4 years ago. I get a call from my daughter. She said, Daddy, she was in college in New York. That poem you wrote about me is on the subway in New York, and that was fun to hear from her. And then you hear from a lot of people who don't read poetry normally. Hundreds of thousands of people, ride the subway every day in New York. And I got a lot of emails and stuff like that. It's just a tiny little poem called A Little Tooth. They have to be small to fit on these things on the subway. But it's only a 9-line poem. It's called A Little Tooth. It's more for the parents in the audience than the younger people. Your baby grows a tooth, then 2 and 4 and 5, then she wants some meat directly from the bone. It's all over. She'll learn some words. She'll fall in love with cretins, dolts, a sweet talker on his way to jail. And you, your wife, get old, fly blown, and rue nothing. You did, you loved, your feet are sore. It's dark. Your daughter's tall. She is pretty tall now. I've been taking an informal survey for the last couple of years whenever I go to colleges and high schools, and I have a question for the younger people in this audience. When your parents call you on your cell phone and leave you a message, do you listen to that message or do you just call them back? How many of you actually listen to the messages? Really? And how many of you just call them back without listening? No kidding, that's a higher percentage of good kids here than in other places. That's good, and particularly if they're paying for the cell phone, call them, listen to the message and then call them back. I saw a piece of graffiti outside of Asheville, North Carolina, some years ago, and it was in a very inaccessible place on an overpass on a highway. And it said in giant letters in spray paint, "I love you, sweatheart." And that's the name of this poem. I love you, sweatheart. A man risked his life to write the words. A man hung upside down, an idiot friend holding his legs, with spray paint to write the words on a girder 50 feet above a highway. And his beloved, the next morning, driving to work, his words are not meant to be so unique. Does she recognize his handwriting? Did he hint to her at her doorstep the night before of something special, darling, tomorrow? And did he call her at work, expecting her to faint with delight at his celebration of her, his passion, his risk? She will know I love her now. The world will know my love for her. A man risked his life to write the words. Love is like this at the bone. We hope love is like this, sweetheart, all sore and dumb and dangerous, ignited, blessed, always, regardless. No exceptions, always in blazing matters like these, blessed. So I make fun of that guy because he's doing something really stupid, but he's doing it for love. And once, a couple times, it astonished me that women have said to me, "Why do you assume that that's a man who wrote that?" And the only thing I can say to that, I won't use the word I usually use, but are you bleeping kidding me? Of course it was a man who wrote that. I mean, women do stupid things for love, but not that stupid. It was a famous piece of graffiti. I had a person come up to me once who grew up around there, and they said that was their mother's pet name for them when they were little, sweatheart. This poem has a kind of violent title, but it's not a violent poem. It's called Eyes Scooped Out and Replaced by Hot Coals. You'll find out the circumstances under which that could happen to you in the poem. The above, the punishment, the mild but just punishment, symbolic, the great advance our planet most needs. The procedure is painless, using methods currently available only in cartoons. Polls were taken. The results were overwhelmingly in favor. The justness of it, known in the bone by each of our nation, is undeniable. Thus, it is proclaimed on this day, Anno Domino, etc., I, the final arbiter and ultimate enforcer of such things, appointed by the king, by the way, make official and binding this, that the eyes shall be gouged out and replaced by hot coals in the head, the blockhead of each citizen who, upon reaching his/her majority, has yet to read Moby Dick by Mr. Herman Melville, 1819 to 1891, American novelist and poet. So if there's any of you who are willing to admit that you're 21 years old and you haven't read Moby Dick yet, we have a brazier going out there, and I'll take care of that later. Almost every poet writes a poem, kind of poem called Ars Poetica, one time or another. Ars Poetica is just a poem that is a poetic description of the particular poet's definition, kind of poetry. And this one is one of mine, called The Pier Aspiring. Pier as in P-I-E-R, the thing we tie boats up to. The pier aspiring. The guy who's speaking this poem is, he's building this pier, and he's on the land side of the pier, and he's talking to someone about it. He's telling someone about this pier. See if you can see how far out it goes. See? You can't see the end. I'd take you out there, but it's a 6-hour walk, and the work's redundant. One board laid down after another. When the sun is high, the boards are hot. Splinters always pose a problem walking any other way but straight. What keeps me working on it, driving piles, hauling timber, what's kept my hand on the hammer, the barnacle scraper, what keeps me working through the thirst, the nights when the waves' tops pound the pier from beneath, what keeps me glad for the work, the theory is, despite the ridicule at the lumber yard, the treks with pails of nails, my arms 2 centimeters longer each trip, the theory is this. It's my body's habit, hand over foot, paycheck to paycheck. It's in the grain of my bones, lunch bucket to lunch box. It's good to wear an X on my back, to bend my back to the sky. It's right to use the hammer and the saw. It's good to sleep out there, attached at one distant end, and tomorrow adding to that distance. The theory is it will be a bridge. And I'd like to think of poems as being some kind of bridge between a reader and a writer. This is called The Joy Bringer. The joy bringer breaks the light through the oak leaves at dawn. The joy bringer injects the red bird's red. The joy bringer brings the green, lets the cup runneth over into a saucer from which you can sip. Gives fish the river the fish. If by 2 inches you avoid a piano falling on your head, and later at the hospital fall in love with the doctor who removes a few splinters of ivory and black piano lacquer from your left calf, the joy bringer arranged that. Also, the chilled artesian water spilling from a pipe only 2 inches above the ground, from which you drank on your hands and knees on a few boards or branches. You bowed in the muck and drank that sweet cold reaching up. You drank among the skunk cabbage, ferns, a small brook at your back. Again, guess what? The joy bringer. In fact, let us praise the joy bringer for these 7 things. 1, right lung. 2, left lung. 3, heart. 4, left brain. 5, right brain. 6, tongue. 7, the body to put them in. Thank you, joy bringer. And thank ye too, for just mown hay. cut an inch from its roots to bleed its perfume into the sky. It's one of my favorite smells, the smell of fresh cut hay. Apparently they've learned how to create it chemically. Now you can even get perfume that smells like fresh cut hay. If I haven't mentioned, I grew up on a dairy farm, so I'm familiar with things like that. This is called the Happy Majority, and it has an epigraph from P.T. Barnum, of all people, where he says, before I joined the great and the happy majority, and by the happy majority, he means the dead. So this is my response to that statement. Before I joined the happy majority, though I doubt one member happy nor one unhappy, I have some plans to discover several new species of beetle, to jump from a 100-foot platform into a pile big enough to break my fall of multicolored lingerie, to build a little heater, not to join the happy ones until some tasks are done beside each tulip bulb to speed its bloom, to read 42,007 books, list available on request, to learn to read and or write Chinese, CAT scan, Sanskrit, petroglyphs, and English, to catch a bigot, not to join the happy ones until some tasks are done, by the toe, to kiss the clavicle of, name available on request, to pay my respects again to the grave of John Keats, to abrogate my position in God's nihilistic, not to join the happy ones until some tasks are done, dream, to hold my mother's hand as she leaves this world, to lay my hand upon my father's heart as he does likewise, and for my daughter to be glad I was her father, as I exit also in 100 years or so from the conscious to the un. It's the only poem I've ever written ending on a hyphen, I believe. I'm going to read a few poems from this newer book now. Came out about a year ago, almost a year ago, called Child Made of Sand. I was reading from a book called God Particles. And it had nothing to do with that physics thing of God particles. This poem is called Dead Horse. At the fence line, I was about to call him in when, at 2/3 profile, head low and away from me, he fell first to his right front knee and then the left, and he was down, dead before he hit the... My father saw him drop too, and a neighbor who walked over. He was a good horse, old, spavined, eating grass during the day and his oats and hay at night. He didn't mind or try to boss the cows with which he shared these acres. My father said, happens. Our neighbor, named Malcolm, walked back to his place and was soon grinding towards us with his tractor's new backhoe, which he was proud, but so far used only to dig 2 sump holes. It was the knacker who'd haul away a cow. A horse, a good horse, you buried where he or she fell. Malcolm cut a trench beside the horse and we pushed him in. I'd already said goodbye before I tried to close his eyes. Our neighbor returned the dirt from where it came. In it, stones. Stones never seen before by a human's or even a worm's eye. With the back of a shovel, we tamped the dirt down. One dumb cow stood by. It was a Friday. For supper, we ate hot dogs with beans on buttered white bread. Every Friday, hot dogs and beans. Did any of you have the regular meals on certain days of the week growing up? Friday was hot dogs and beans. I'm just going to read a couple more poems. Most poets write at one time or another, although you could argue that all poems are persona poems, i.e. poems spoken in someone's other voice than your own, but this one is a more strict persona poem. The character in this poem is not me. It's called The Goldfish Room. Anybody ever hear that term, the Goldfish Room? The rest of the title describes it, says what it is, defines it. The Goldfish Room, where the cops beat you in the head with the phone book. No way, I rat, I don't give a row of red apples. I've been on the wrong end of sharper things. I've been hit in the head by harder things. A diamond anvil once, the flat of my mother's hand, a shovel, pickaxe, that time my face was on fire. There was the bus backed over my head. My skull still pliable enough, the doctor molded it back. This was the 1940s to almost normal. By my third arrest for literacy, the cops knew I was a bum case. I said, if you hang me, do it high enough so the wolves can't eat at night my feet. They gave me a choice, rubber hose or the yellow pages. I said the yellow pages, so afterwards I can look up bulldozers, so I can look up acetylene and stone, so I can look up your address, so I can look up salt to sow. I've been hit harder, heavier with this object or that word by people who didn't care, which did scare me, what gashes, what lacerations were left. I have a German translator, and he wanted to know what that, he didn't get that row of red apples. I don't care a row of red apples. That's just an older, kind of archaic euphemism, American euphemism. But he had never heard it before. Linda mentioned this poem in her introduction, Farmers Who Live by Rivers. And this poem is called The Riverine Farmers. Again, it's a persona poem, and turns out to be spoken by a little girl. The Riverine Farmers. Farming by a river, your fields within 20 feet of its banks shade trees. Drinking from the river, bathing in it, feeding your fields with its waters, taking fish in the winter, eels from beneath the ice at its crenellated edges, thanking it for the silt it leaves after spring's snow melt, sitting by it in August when it's lowest, its bigger bedstones exposed. What we do, because there was a bow in the river, what we do, my brothers and I, was launch some boats of sticks and leaves and then race across the bow's neck to see which ones made it around the bend's swirling eddies. Then watch them ride the little rapids that slid under the barbed wire fence, ending our land. The boys sometimes threw stones at the boats, making boy noise explosions. Father stood at the river's edge, one hand in his pocket, the other leaning on the walking stick he needed. On the wind, a quarter-mile upriver, Mother was weeping. Every year the river, every year the weeping, every year the sowing, most years the reaping. Let's read one more poem. And we can have a few questions. It's called A Frozen Ball of Rattlesnakes. Frozen Ball of Rattlesnakes. The speaker of this poem, because of that title, he's a little bit more agitated, because that makes him nervous, that notion, that image of a frozen ball of rattlesnakes. How'd they get in a ball? What do you mean by a ball? How many in it? And do you mean stone frozen? Or do you mean dormant, sluggish, half hibernating? Snakes can do that, right? Rattlesnakes live in other countries too. There are many species, right? I've seen copperheads and cottonmouths in some mountains and a few desultory streams I knew. I live in a large southern metropolis now, and my neighbors found a rattler, albeit a small one, in their cellar. Killed it with a shovel. They have a child and a dog. In the frozen ball, do they wake up one by one? Are those closest to the middle warmer than the others? They're all cold-blooded. Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, used the phrase metaphorically more than once. It's a good metaphor, easy to read, vivid. Metaphors should be, and sometimes should terrify. A man chops off another man's head, props the corpse sitting up against a roadside pole, and places the man's head in his hands, on his lap. Thank you very, very much. I'll be happy to answer a few questions if you like. That last image is something I actually read, something that happened in Iraq, sending a message to somebody, whoever it was, trying to send a message to somebody else, cut somebody's head off, prop them up, put their head in their lap. But that whole, it's a metaphor, frozen ball of rattlesnakes. What happens when a frozen ball of rattlesnakes wakes up? Trouble. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? It's always hard to get started with questions. Yeah. I guess, or if you could make yourself heard.
I really like your poem, Henry Clay's Mouth. Can you tell me just what inspired that, how you got the idea to write it?
Yeah. I was reading a giant history book, History of the American People, and there was a reference in it that Henry Clay had a particularly large mouth, wide mouth. But I didn't take a note on it. But I couldn't get it out of my mind. So I tried to find it. Only I thought it was Alexander Hamilton, because I looked at, you look at what bill is he on, a 10 or 5? But you look at Hamilton, he's got a very wide mouth too. So I kept looking up under all the indexes for Hamilton. I couldn't find it. But I knew I wanted to find this reference. It was a 1,000-page book. I wasn't going to read it all myself again. So I gave it to a graduate student of mine, and it was her job. She was working for me, so she had to read it. And she found it. Luckily, it was only about page 350. And it was, Henry Clay did have a very large mouth, and he loved to kiss. He loved to kiss. And he loved to party. He was a pretty serious drinker. He liked to gamble. He was also one of the greatest statesmen we ever had, and delayed the Civil War by many years with his compromises, and was almost president, and just a great American. But I just got that stuck in my mind, and had to find the reference and go back and see if I could make a poem about it. There's a little bit of a thing at the end there. I wrote that poem around the time of the Clintons scandal, and there's just a little bit of a hint there. I'm hoping for at the end that someone might draw that parallel, that a good political career was marred by a sexual scandal. So I was hoping to pick up a little bit of that, but mostly it was just a poem in praise of Henry Clay, one of my American heroes. It's good to have graduate students sometimes who have to do work for you, though. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I have two questions. Do
Shoot.
you know the author Emerson? And if you do, what are your thoughts on him?
Ralph Waldo Emerson?
Yep.
He's one of my heroes. I used to sign my letters transcendentally yours when I was deeply into Emerson. He said one of the One of the smartest things about poetry and metrics, he said, it's not meter that matters so much, perfect meter, because that will put anybody to sleep, perfect meter for more than a couple lines. He said what he called meter-making argument. And writing in meter is really writing off of or against meter. It's breaking the pattern in particular places at particular times for a reason, to make something happen. And that can actually make something happen in the reader's body. You can get it, a physiological response. But I read several biographies of Emerson and of course, Thoreau and periods of other American writers of that time. I even use a little epigraph of his in one of my books. Late in his life, he was probably had what we call Alzheimer's now, and he was leaving Longfellow's funeral, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's funeral, and he said, "I don't remember our friend's name, but he was a good man." And I always like that quote. So Emerson is a great American writer, and he had a good heart. He was a good man. So that's how I feel. He's not considered generally a great American poet, but probably the first truly American philosopher, and a good man.
My second question is, how do you think your poetry has changed from when you started until now?
Well, I used to be much more surreal. I grew up really liking surrealist poetry, but came to believe that was kind of a dead end, that it had too much to do with arbitrariness and chance. So I think giving that up without trying to compromise my imaginative abilities too much is probably the biggest change. And I also just learned my craft. I learned the craft more and more, and still have a great deal more to learn. But poetry is an art form. It's a craft, and there's a great deal to learn. And when I was very young, I didn't know that much. I thought the most important thing, and I still think they're tremendously important, but it was imagination and passion in poems. But like all artists, you need to learn to shape and control them, those things better. Not to stifle them, but by adding the craft, the formal elements of poetry, it doesn't diminish the passion of the poem, it heightens it. It makes it more intense if you do it right. I don't know if I've ever done it right, but we need to learn our craft. Everybody, whatever your field is, you need to learn your craft and everything you can about your art form. Any other questions? Yeah, there's a dude with earphones on there. Are you listening to the ball game by any chance?
No. I was just wondering, like, how do you get inspired to write? I mean, and then when you become inspired, then how do you generally write it down? You just kind of jot it down from, like, how John Milton did it, just kind of like from the person?
I don't know how Milton did later because he was blind. I think he dictated to his daughter. I don't particularly like that word inspiration myself. I don't particularly even believe in inspiration. I believe in work. I believe you need to feel something intensely. You need to be committed to some kind of whatever the subject of the poem is. But inspiration, I mean, whoever told you that spontaneity or inspiration is what makes art? It's not. What makes art is work. Exactly. Why one works at it is because you love it. Poems are made things, and I like to, that's the one thing I have ever tried to make with any seriousness, and like trying to make. It's no different than if I was like I built birdhouses exclusively, and that's all I wanted to do. I would put everything I could into trying to build the best birdhouse that I possibly could. So it's not about, for me, inspiration. And anything I read to you tonight, didn't write in less than 15 drafts, and sometimes 20 or 30 or 40, and always at least weeks before I would even read it to somebody or show it to somebody, and often months and sometimes even years. Inspiration really doesn't matter that much. I feel something deeply. If you call that inspiration, then,
Exactly,
then I'm inspired all the time.
Because like, as a writer, I tend to work really hard to like form the best draft that I can, but
Yeah.
it comes from deep within here.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, it's got to. But and that's what I do, and I get the best draft that I can, and then I get draconian on that draft's ass. I work on it over and over and over again, trying to listen to the poem and listen to what it's trying to tell me that I didn't know I knew, and try to make some kind of discovery. Writing is a process of discovery for me. I never know exactly where a poem is going when I start it. I just know that something's nagging at me, and I got to try to do something with a line, an image, a rhythm, something like that. And then I just work on it.
Yeah.
Nothing glamorous about it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? One more?
Shoot, sir.
People like to analyze poetry and poets. Probably have a lot of thoughts on that. But it seems like such a personal thing. Do you qualify poets and think they're good poets and bad poets, or just poets?
Oh, I think just poets, and I know what you mean about analyzing poetry, and I talked about this afternoon a little bit. 2 or 3 generations of Americans grew up hating poetry because we didn't understand it, and we were told that poets never meant what they said. It was always some kind of riddle, or it was something we had to decipher, and for a whole century almost, or a good part of the 20th century, a lot of people hated poetry because it made them feel stupid, made us feel stupid. I think it's possible to write a original, wild, crazy, whatever, off-the-wall poem and still make it accessible enough. I think it's rude. I mean, I hope that you basically got the guts of whatever I was writing, that I just read to you. If you didn't get some of the reference or something, that's okay. But I hope you understood in your bone marrow and in your guts the basic human business these poems are about. I think it's rude to be obscure. I think it's rude to expect anybody to read something that's deliberately obscure. Primo Levi, the great writer, said that it was rude, but he also said that deliberate obscurity was a kind of pre-suicide, a kind of not wanting to be, and I think that's true. For me. To me, it would be insulting to you if I stood up here and read something to you that was completely incomprehensible. That would be like insulting you and wasting your time. But I'm also trying to write something as original as possible, as fresh as possible. But I'm never trying to be deliberately obscure or arbitrary. That's that bridge poem. I want a poem to be some kind of connection between myself and a reader. And most of the time, you never see that reader, meet that reader, talk to that reader. You never even know if there are readers, but you still, or I do, I try to keep that as one of my principles of trying to write well. Poetry is... to me, it's not a luxury. It's a necessity. And it doesn't need to be defended any more than air or bread needs to be defended. It's something that helps us feel a little more alive and a little less alone and a little more communicative with our fellow humans. And I love the idea that poetry, every single culture on the face of the earth developed a poetry on its own, not learning it from other cultures. And from the beginning of time, the first poets were chanting around a fire in a cave. Same time they were putting their fingerprints on the walls or their handprints. There's something deep in the human psyche that needs what poetry delivers, which is essentially a kind of a story, usually more distilled and rhythmical than regular stories. But human beings love stories. We need stories. That's what movies are stories, novels, plays, whatever. We love stories. We need stories. It's how we learn how to become not just people, but humans, but human beings, I think. Or literature is one of the things that can do that. There are other things, too. Thank you all very, very much. I had a great time. Thank you.